Hello there. Let us continue solving questions on iteration statements. And we have already started with the nested loop patterns category, where in the last few videos, we have completed the box subcategory where we had solved 14 questions in total. And we had also completed the left aligned right angle triangle subcategory where we had solved these 13 questions. In this video, we will get started with the left aligned inverted right angle triangle subcategory where we will solve these 5 questions. So let us get started with the first question from the list. So this is what we are supposed to print when n equal to 5. Now, following from the last few videos, what would be the next step? The next step would be to draw a grid around this, number the rows and number the columns, right? So let us quickly do that. So if we draw a grid around the pattern that we are trying to print and number the rows and number the columns as well, this is what we will end up with. Now again, following from the last few videos, we know that we need a nested loop to be able to handle this, right? So when I talk about nested loop, what I mean is we will have an outer loop and we will have an inner loop. Now, what we had discussed was the outer loop would take care of the rows, right? And the inner loop is for the columns. And in the last few videos, we had used the loop control variable I for the outer loop and loop control variable J for the inner loop, right? So let us put that information over here. So I will be used for each of the rows and J will be for the columns. So with all of these discussed, what next? Well, now let us take a look at the number of rows that we have. So for n equal to 5, we have a total of 5 rows, right? If n was 6 instead, we would have one more row over here. So we would have a total of 6 rows, which means the number of rows is equal to the value of n. Now, from whatever we know, for taking care of the number of rows that we will need a loop, right? So, and also we know that that loop will be controlled by a variable called I. So with all of that information, let us put the code for the outer loop. So the outer loop would go from 0 all the way up to n minus 1 with an increment of 1, right? And this is something that we have discussed in the last few videos. So if you take a look at what the values of I will be, it will go from 0 to n minus 1 because we're going for less than n. So if n equal to 5, it will start from 0 and then go all the way up to 4, which is what we need, right? So this outer loop that we have over here, and I'm saying outer loop again and again because we will have another loop here, which we will talk about in a moment. So with the outer loop that we have over here, we have taken care of iterating for n number of times, right? So each iteration would take care of one row. Now, if you take a look at each row that we have, and if we try to determine the number of columns that we will need for each row, you will find that the number of columns, first of all, is different in each row, right? So in the first row, we have got 5 columns in total because it is starting from 0 and going all the way up to 4, right? So let me put 0 to 4 over here. Then in the second row, we have got a total of 4 columns starting from 0 all the way up to 3, right? In the third row, we have got 3 columns. So 3 columns starting from 0 going all the way up to 2. Then in the fourth row, we have got 2 columns. So 2 columns, 0 and 1. And the last row, we've got just 1 column, right? So it starts at 0 and ends at 0. So now let us take a look at this. And let me put it over here properly. So what did we observe was, we observed that when I is 0, it is starting from 0 and going all the way up to 4. So I is 0, the range for columns would be from 0 to 4. When I is 1, over here it is 0 to 3. For 2, it is 0 to 2. So for I1, it is 0 to 3. For 2, it will be 0 to 2. Then let's take a look at I equal to 3. So when I is 3, it is going for 0 and 1, and I4, it is going just for 0, right? So 3, it is 0 and 1, and 4, it is just 0. And by the way, all of these are the column numbers, right? So if we now observe this, what would we see? Well, let me first of all move it towards the left. What we see is all of them is starting from 0, right? See, all of them is starting from 0, but all of them are ending at different numbers. So let us first of all figure out where would they end. So for that, when I is 0, let's figure out the end. So when I is 0, it will end at 4. When I is 1, it will end at 3. For I2, it will end at 2. For I3, it will end at 1. And for I4, it will end at 0, right? So now let's focus our attention here for a moment, because this would give us an expression to determine the range, right? So I0 end is 4 and so on. So if you take a look, what would you observe is, if you add I and end, what would you get? Well, you would get 4, right? So can we say that end is actually 4 minus I? What I mean is, can I write it this way? So if I write it this way, let's say this holds true or not. So I'm saying for each value of I, we can determine end by calculating 4 minus I. So when I is 0, 4 minus 0 will give us 4, which is what the value of end is. When I is 1, it will give us 3, right? And when I is 2, this will give us 2. When I is 3, this will give us 1. And lastly, when I is 4, this will give us 0. So we can say for sure that for the range that we will have for each value of I, it is going to start from 0 and it is going to end at 4 minus I, right? Now it is 4 minus I because n is equal to 5. Okay, I've removed that. So it is because n equal to 5. If n was 6, what would have happened is this would have been 5 minus I, right? Although I'm not taking an example to prove this point of mine, but I would recommend that you do it so that you get a better understanding of whatever we are discussing over here. So coming back to this, for each value of I, we will have a certain range, which is something we deduced from here, right? And if we take a look at the range, we would see that each of them is starting from 0 and they are going all the way up to 4 minus I, correct? And this 4 can be written in terms of n, because we know that it is 4 because n is 5. So what I'm saying is, n is 5, it will be 4, n is 6, it will be 5, and so on. So can we say that this 4 can be written as n minus 1? We can, right? So we will get this ultimately. So summarizing, for each value of I, we will have a range that will give us the column numbers, right? And that range is going to start from 0 and it is going to end at n minus 1 minus I. So let me put that properly over here. So it will be 0 all the way up to n minus 1 minus I. So if we take this, we will be able to determine the range. And since we will be able to determine the range, we would be able to determine the iteration required for the columns in each of the rows, right? Because again, the columns in each of the rows are changing. It is going from 5 in the first row to 1 in the last row. And to get each of the columns, we would have to ensure that the inner loop iterates properly. And for the inner loop to iterate properly, we can use this range, right? The inner loop can start from 0 and go all the way up to n minus 1 minus I, correct? So with this discussed, let me remove these first and let me write the inner loop as well over here. So we will have for j is equal to 0 because that is the start of the range, and it is going all the way up to and including n minus 1 minus I. So we'll say j less than equal to n minus 1 minus I, and j plus plus, right? So this is that nested loop that you would need for patterns like these. Now, before I start writing the code, let me dry run this and show you the values of I and j that we will have, considering the value of n is 5. So let me write n is equal to 5 over here, and then we will have I and we will have j. Now I is going from 0 to less than n, which means it will go from 0 all the way up to 4, correct? J is starting from 0 and it is going until n minus 1 minus I, right? So let's figure out what will be the range of j for I 0. So we have got n minus 1 minus I. So we can say 5 minus 1 minus 0. This will give us 4, right? So it is starting from 0 and going all the way up to 4, including 4, which means this is what we will have. We will have 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? Now for I equal to 1, if I replace this 0 with 1, we will get 5 minus 1, which is 3. So we will have 0 all the way up to 3. Similarly, if I replace this and put 2 instead, we will get 0, 1, and 2, right? Then 0, 1, and then lastly 0. So if we take a look at I and j, what we will get? We will have combinations like 0, 0, which is something we have over here. Then 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, and 0, 4, right? So we have got 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, and 0, 4. Then for I1, we will have 0, 1, 2, 3. So it will be 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 2, and 1, 3. Then for I2, we will have 0, 1, 2. So 2, 0, 2, 1, 2, 2. And we have got 2, 0, 2, 1, 2, 2 over here. Similarly, 3, 0, 3, 1 and 4, 0, which is something we have over here, which means that the loop that we have over here, or more specifically, the nested loop that we have over here, will help us iterate in the exact same way that we need to be able to print this pattern, right? So before we discuss further, let me clear this. And okay, let's clear these as well. All right. Now we know how to iterate, right? We know that we will get each of these cells with the iteration logic that we have put. Now what next? The next is to determine what to print in each of the iteration. And as you can see, in each of the iteration, irrespective of the values of I and j, what we are printing is an asterisk, right? So what we will have to do inside the inner loop is we will have to put a print statement saying an asterisk and maybe also leave a space. And here what we will have to do is we'll have to put a system.out.println an empty one, which will be after the inner for loop, right? And we need to do that because as you can see, in each row, we are printing a certain number of asterisks and then we are moving to the next line. So this would print asterisk in this way, right? Once you have printed 5 asterisk for n is equal to 5 in the first row, you need to move to the second line to be able to start printing from here, right? And that is what this system.out.println will help us in achieving. So with all of this discussed, now let us go to IntelliJ, and for printing this pattern, let us write this code. So let's expand src, then iteration statements, then questions, and over here nested loop patterns. And the first thing I'll do is I will create a package with this name, which is left aligned inverted right angle triangle. So let me quickly do that. And then I'll create a new Java class and I'll name this as Q1. Now over here we'll have a PSVM, that is public static void main. And then I'll create a variable, say n, assign 5 to it, and then start the iteration. So I'll say int I equal to 0, I less than n, I plus plus, and the inner loop would be for int j equal to 0, j less than equal to n minus 1 minus I, and j plus plus. And what we will do here inside the inner loop is we will print an asterisk followed by a space, and this would be system.out.print and not println, right? And then what we would do next is this. we would have a system.out.println after this inner for loop. So with this, let's run the code and check the output. And for n equal to 5, this is what we are getting. 5 asterisk in the first row, then 4, then 3, then 2, and then 1, which is exactly what we wanted to do, right? So before I go to the next question, let me come back over here and let us take a look at the inner loop that we have. So the inner loop is starting from 0 and going all the way up to n minus 1 minus I, right? So this is, of course, a correct way to handle this question because we've seen that it is working absolutely fine. But in some places, you'd find a small variation of this. And that variation would be j less than, not j less than equal to, it would be j less than. Now, before I tell you what the condition entirely would be, let me come back over here and let's take a look at the inner loop. So the inner loop is j equal to 0, j less than equal to n minus 1 minus I. So on the next page, let me quickly note a few things down. So using this, that is starting from 0 and going all the way up to and including n minus 1 minus I, for each value of I, we were able to get these values of j, right? Now, what I mentioned was, in some variation, you would see it written as j less than something, not less than equal to, but just less than, right? So take a look at whatever we have over here for j. Now I'm saying j less than equal to something, and that is leading me from 0 all the way up to 4, right? Which means whatever this is evaluating to 4. That is why I'm going from 0 to 4, correct? Now, if I have to say j less than something and not j less than equal to, what I would need this to be evaluated to is 5, right? Because if this evaluates to 5, only then this condition and this condition would be same, right? So this condition evaluated to 4, because of which I went from 0 all the way up to 4. This condition has to evaluate to 5 so that I can go from 0 all the way up to 4, because here I'm using a less than, correct? Similarly, what I would need for I equal to 1 is that this condition evaluates to 4. That is why j less than 4 would give me 0, 1, 2, 3. And in both of these cases, it is pretty obvious that j starts from 0, right? So what am I saying is this condition, that is j less than something, should give me 4 for I equal to 1. Similarly, it should give me 3 for I equal to 2, and it should give me 2 for I equal to 3, and lastly 1 for I equal to 4, right? So now compare the value that we got using n minus 1 minus I. So we got 4, 3, 2, 1 and 0 respectively. Now using this new condition that we will have, we need 5, 4, 3, 2 and 1 respectively, which is just one more than the previous value that we got, right? Which means that if I go for this operation n minus 1 minus I, which is what we have over here, and then just add 1 to it, what it will give us is the new value that we need in order to use j less than something, right? Because as you can see, this is the value that we got with n minus 1 minus I. This is the value that we will need for the new condition, and the new value is just one more than the older one, and this applies to all of the cases. That is why what I did was took the older value, which was n minus 1 minus I, and then added 1 to it. So if I solve this, this minus 1 plus 1 will get cancelled, and we will have n minus I, right? Which means that if I say j less than n minus I, what it is going to give me is exactly the same that I got with j less than equal to n minus 1 minus I, right? So with this clear, let us come back to IntelliJ, and over here, let's make that change to see if it is working absolutely fine or not. But before that, let me run the code once again to show you the output. So the output is this, right? The output should remain unchanged. Only then we would consider that this change was perfectly fine. So on the basis of whatever we have discussed, we will have to go for j less than n minus I. So if I run the code, I get exactly the same output. And this will work for 5, this will work for 4, and this will also work for 6. And of course, all of the other values of n, right? So this is the solution to the first question. And of course, not just this, with the minor change that we did, the earlier solution was j less than equal to n minus 1 minus I. So both of them can be used to print this pattern. So with this done, let us move on to the next question. So for n equal to 5, this is what we are supposed to print. Now we already know how to iterate this way, correct? All that we will have to decide is what to print in each cell. So as you can see, for each row, what we are printing is exactly the same. That is, if we are on the first row, we are printing only 1. And if we are on the second row, we are printing 2. On the third row, we are printing 3, and so on. So whatever we are printing is dependent only on the row that we are in and is not dependent on the column that we are in, right? Because as you can see, in the first column, we are printing 1 in the first row, 2 in the second row, 3 in the third row, and so on. So we can conclude that whatever is being printed depends on the row and not the column, right? So when we iterate in a nested loop and in such questions, what do we have access to is the value of n, the value of I, and the value of j. And that is why in this video and in the previous videos also, where we had solved questions using nested loop, what we try to do is we try to determine what to print in each cell using the values of n, I, and j, right? So if we do that same thing over here, what would we get is for I0, what are we printing is 1. For I1, we are printing 2. For I2, we are printing 3. For I3, we are printing 4. And for I4, we are printing 5, correct? So as you can see, whatever we are printing is just 1 more than the value of I, right? So if we are on the value of I, say 1, we are printing 2. Same thing applies to 2, 3, 4, and 0 as well, correct? So if we iterate and we grab the value of I and we just add 1 to it and then print it, will we be able to get this? We will be, right? So with this discussed, let us come back to IntelliJ and let me quickly create a new Java class and name it as Q2. And what am I going to do is I'm going to copy the main method from here and I'm going to paste it here. Now, like we have discussed, what we will have to do is we'll have to change what is getting printed, and what is getting printed depends on the value of I, correct? So what we will do here is we'll just add 1 to the value of I, because we have seen when I is 0, it is printing 1. When I is 1, it should be printing 2, and so on. So we'll add 1 to the value of I, leave a space, and then that is it. So if I run the code, this is what we are getting for n equal to 6. If I change it to n equal to 5, this is what we will get. That is 5, 1 in the first row, 4, 2 in the second row, 3, 3 in the third row, and so on, which is exactly what we wanted. So this is how we can solve this question. Now let us move on to the next question. And if you take a look, the second question and the third question is kind of similar, right? In the second question, what we are doing in the first row is we are printing the first natural number, which is 1. In the third question, what we are doing in the first row is we are printing the first letter of the English alphabet, right? So that is why I'm saying these are kind of similar. In the second row, in the second question, we printed 2. Here we are printing B. Here we printed 3. And here we are printing C, and so on, right? So all that we will have to do now is we will have to modify the solution of question 2 a little bit to get A instead of 1, B instead of 2, C instead of 3, and so on, right? So let us discuss that and then write the code for this. All right, so this is what we need, right? And as we have discussed briefly now, for I0, we have to print A. For I1, we have to print B. For 2, C. 3D, and 4E, right? So let us pay attention to this, and let me quickly bring this thing down here. So when I is 0, we have to print A. Now, how can we do that? How can we print A when I is 0 or B when I is 1 and so on? So if you take a look, can we say that when I is 0, we print A, and when I is 1, we print A plus 1. That is one letter after A, which is the first letter, right? Similarly, when I is 2, we have to print C. So can we say we are printing two letters after A, right? And the same thing holds for 3 and 4 as the value of I, and the letters that we are printing, that is D and E. So we are printing A plus 3 and A plus 4. And here I'm assuming that you're familiar that if I go for A plus 1 and convert this to character, we will get B. If not, let me quickly demonstrate that to you and then come back to this. So for that, let's come back to IntelliJ. Let me create a new Java class Q3 and let's have a main method. Now, if I print this, what we will get? We will get A, right? If I print A plus 1, what do we get? Well, we get 66. We're getting 66 because what's happening over here is we are adding a character and an integer. And because of that, what's happening is character is also getting converted to an integer, right? And A converted to an integer will be 65. That is the ASCII code of A. So that is why 65 plus 1 is giving us 66. So if we want to print B and not 66, what we will have to do is we will have to typecast this back to a character, right? So 66 when typecasted to character would give us B. So if I run the code, we get B. Similarly, if I change it to 3, for example, it will print A plus 3, which means 3 letters after A, which is D. And that is what we have. So with all of this discussed, if I come back over here, what do you observe? Can we say that for any value of I, all that we have to do is we have to print A plus I. That holds true, right? So when I is 0, if we go for A plus 0, this will give us 65. And if we convert this to char, we will get A. Similarly, when I is 1, we go for A plus I, which is A plus 1. This would give us B. That is something we have just seen. And the same thing holds true for the rest of the values of I also, right? So that's how we will be able to print this pattern. So with this discussed, let us come back to IntelliJ. And what am I going to do is go to Q2 and copy this part of the main method. And I'm going to paste it over here. Let's comment this out for now. We'll later delete it. So on the basis of whatever we have discussed, what would we have to do is print A plus I, right? So that is what we will do. We'll say A plus I. Now we know that if we leave it this way, this is going to print the ASCII code. So on the basis of whatever we have discussed here, we'll have to typecast this to a char. So if with that change done, if I run the code, this is what we are getting. 5A in the first line, 4B in the next line, 3C in the next line, and so on, which is exactly what we wanted, right? So before I move to the next question, let me come back to IntelliJ. Let me get rid of this statement and let's clean up the code. So with this, we're done with the third question from the list. Now, let us move on and talk about the fourth question here. So this is what we are supposed to print for n equal to 5. Now, again, what will we have to do is we'll have to check I and j and what we are printing at that particular cell, right? And we'll have to find out a pattern, because only then we will be able to use a nested loop and print this. So in the first row, what are we doing is we're printing 1 first, then 2, then 3, then 4, and then 5, right? So can we say that this is going from 1 all the way up to 5? Now here it is going from 1 all the way up to 4, right? That is the first thing you would notice if you take a look at whatever we are printing. And this is going from 1 all the way up to 1, right? So what we see is the values are changing in each row itself. That is, in the first row, first of all, we printed 1, then we printed 2, then 3, then 4, and then 5, right? So whatever we are printing is not really dependent on the row, correct? If we take a look at the column, we would see that when we are on the 0th column, what we are printing is 1. When we are on the first column, sorry, column number 1, the second column, we are printing 2. Then we are on the third column, we are printing 3. Then fourth column, printing 4, and fifth column, printing 5. So with this observation, can we say that whatever we are printing is dependent on the column number? We can, right? So let me get rid of this quickly and let me write the observation over here. So when j is 0, what we are printing is 1. When j is 1, we are printing 2, j2 3, j3 4, and j4 5, right? So with that discussed, what do you see? What will we have to do next? Well, what we will have to do is we'll just have to modify the print statement that we had used in questions 1, 2, and 3, right? And instead of using I over here, we're going to use j. So whatever is the value of j, we'll just add 1 to it to get what to print, right? So if j is 0, we get 1. If j is 1, we get 2, and so on. So with this clear, let us come back to IntelliJ and let's create a new Java class, say Q4, and over here we'll have a main method. And let me grab the contents of main method from Q3 and paste it here. Now on the basis of whatever we have discussed, what would we need is j plus 1. That is it, right? So if I run the code, I get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, and so on, which is exactly what we needed, but there's a space over here which we have missed out here. So let me put that space back and then let's run the code. And this is the output, which is exactly what we wanted. So with this, we solved the fourth question from the list. Now moving on to the last question from the list, which is similar to the second last or the fourth question that we have just solved, right? So like we compared question number 2 and question number 4 and realized that wherever 1 is getting printed, we have to print A. Wherever 2 is getting printed, we have to print B. You would see the same thing when you compare question number 4 and question number 5. See, wherever we had 1 in question number 4, we are printing A, right? Wherever we had 2, we are printing B. Wherever we had 3, we are printing C, and so on. So what we will have to do is use the exact code that we had used over here for question number 4. And we just have to ensure that for 1, we are printing A, for 2, we are printing B, and so on, right? So for that, let us come back here and let's discuss further. So this is what we will need to change. We need to put A instead of 1 and B instead of 2, C instead of 3, and so on, right? And this is what we had earlier. That is, for J0 we had 1, J1 we had 2, and so on. But we need A, B, C, D, and E respectively, right? So if I write it down this way, you would be able to understand what exactly is happening over here, correct? So for j equal to 0, we need a plus 0. For j1, we need a plus 1 because we need b, right? For j2, we need a plus 2 because we need c, and so on. So can we write this as a plus j? We can, right? So for whatever value of j that we have, all we have to do is go for a plus j, and of course, print this as a character. With this, we will be able to solve the fifth and the last question from the list, right? So with this discussed, let's come back to IntelliJ and let me first of all create a new Java class, call it Q5. Let me grab the main method of Q4, come back over here and paste. And what we will have to do is change the system.out.print in line number 9 to print what? To print A plus J, right? And we need to print this as a character. So we will put a char over here. That is, we are just typecasting A plus J. With this, if I run the code, oh, and we need to give a space. So now if I run the code, I get A, B, C, D, E in the first line, in the first row, then A, B, C, D, then A, B, C, then A, B, and then lastly A, which is exactly what we needed. So with this, we have solved the last question from the list. And with this, we have come to the end of the video. So I hope I've been able to teach you something new and useful. And by the way, this is not the last subcategory. We have got a lot more that you can see over here, right? So I hope you've learned something new and useful. And if you have any suggestions, feedback, or queries, feel free to put them in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.